autism, I think at its core, is a huge sensory motor dysregulation. And a lot of kids, if you looked at them and said, gee, if we could just normalize their sensory motor system, I don't know that we would be here talking about a lot of these other issues.
So these challenges can include everything from responses to the sensory environment, noises being much too loud, touch being, in some cases, just aversive for some individuals. And of course, every individual is an individual. And so we really look at all of the aspects that make people less available for learning and engaging.
Within our DIR model, as you know, the whole notion is profiling the individual child and tailoring the approach to the child. The D is the developmental levels, the I are the individual processing differences, auditory, visual, spatial, sensory, modulation, etc., motor planning, and the R are the learning relationships, including educational relationships.
When I train teachers, I always start off with the learning pyramid. The learning pyramid starts off with the developmental presets, pre-skills at the bottom. And I talk to teachers about what these presets are, like crossing the midline, being able to integrate body parts, sensory profile, how are their senses? Are they overstimulated, understimulated?
If you're dysregulated, overwhelmed, you're prone to be at the mercy of your fight-flight reactions, right? Shut down, withdraw, get impulsive, get distracted, get aimless. We see this all the time with our children with special needs, whose sensory systems are very fine-tuned, either being underreactive, overreactive, or sensory craving, and so they frequently are overwhelmed or underwhelmed into these more basic, early reactions, which doesn't allow you to think. You get locked into fixed perceptual motor patterns.
Many of us have a sensitivity to fluorescent lights. We may perceive fluorescent lights the way most people perceive a strobe light. Now, a strobe light can be fun on Halloween and other holidays, but it can do a real number on your concentration at work and your productivity in school.
So the thing that really informs us to how to approach the child is figuring out, again, how they learn about their world. So what I mean by this is this a child who is overly sensitive to his environment? Is this a child whom just any kind of sound outside in the hallway is going to really increase his anxiety and send him up a tree? Or is this a child who you could light a firecracker behind and he would never move?
Well, part of what we have to deal with in terms of our sensory differences is that a lot of the information coming to our senses tends to be distorted. So as a result, we have to depend on unreliable information from the environment.
Children with autism live in a world that doesn't always make sense to them. And if you were in a world that didn't make sense to you, how could you even be calm? Of course you would be driving natural anxiety. Anxiety is part and parcel of having an autism spectrum disorder.
Emotional regulation has to do with what we refer to as being available for learning and engaging with others. And we do know that part of the disability, if you will, of autism is that there are many challenges in terms of being available. Now, these challenges are challenges we all face, but unfortunately, due to the neurology underlying autism, many people with autism are more vulnerable to these challenges.
Another aspect of our sensory system is that we often have difficulty with foreground and background. And what that means is that sounds that most of us ignore, we receive full strength. So we might be able to compare that to watching TV with all of the stations on at once instead of just one.
I talked to a teacher last night that said I have a student that is avoiding learning and has on a hood and has on earphones and is texting and has his head down. And I said to the teacher, I said, out of the top of my mind, I could think auditory figure ground, the background noise may be hard for the student, auditory memory, the student can't hold everything that's been happening in the classroom at the same time. And sometimes when a student does that, they're trying to focus. They're trying to focus themselves. They'll put their hood on and they're really trying to focus on what you're doing instead of the opposite, trying to shut you out.
I may be able to tell a typical child, raise your arms, and he'll raise his arms. I might tell a child with autism, raise your arms, and nothing happens. Not because they don't understand that you're supposed to raise your arms, but because their intent is not often hooked up to their motor output. So they are not able to raise their hands.
Another aspect of how we now look at behavior in a different way is that a lot of so-called autistic behaviors that were called autistic behaviors in the past, such as jumping and flapping and rocking and looking at fingers or whatever it might be, we understand now in many cases these are self-calming, self-regulatory behaviors, and that we have to respect the function that they serve. That doesn't necessarily mean it's okay all the time for a child to do that or a person to do that if it's not effective for them or if it's stigmatizing. But if we respect the purpose or the function of the behavior, then we can help a person acquire other ways to serve that same function.
If I know I'm being disruptive to class by being too agitated, I say to the teacher, "Do you mind if I take a walk? Do you mind if I step outside? That way I won't be disruptive to the class."
I just don't believe children are non-compliant without a reason. I don't believe they aren't obeying, and usually the reason they aren't is because they don't have a say in what's going on. I use behavior as a means of communication.
What we try to do is understand what are the risks to an individual's emotional regulation. We believe that we all strive very naturally in life to be well regulated emotionally, so we can be most available for learning and engaging. So if we accept the fact that that's one of the great challenges faced by people with autism, we need to put the proper supports in place, as well as help people with autism develop the coping skills. Because the world is a noisy, loud, busy, fast, crazy place sometimes.
It's amazing that kids go through school and struggle. They're my biggest heroes. They show up every day no matter what. And they don't know why they're struggling. And so part of what I do is I teach the students what it is that they're struggling with and how to communicate that to other instructors and how to compensate for it themselves in their learning. And that's the foundation of everything that we learn. Yeah. What is it that I need to know? How do I need to learn? And how can I tell people and advocate for myself in my learning?